So for yourself, Phil, how long was you out there for?
13
what was
months.
your tour? That was 13. You were without the 13 months.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, with the role that you did,
Mm-hmm.
was it a case of going to different towns
Yeah.
and connecting with the
Well,
locals?
the thing with my job is that I spent time with every different type of unit, right? It was one of the fascinating things about being a PAO. So I'd go out on patrol with your guys. I'd go, meet a couple of sheikhs or local police commanders and get to listen in, see what they were saying, and eat some goat, have some tea, right? From a buddy of mine, Matt Gallagher, talking about it is absolutely critical to our mission in Iraq that American forces drink as much chai as humanly possible. This war will not end until we have drained the world's chai reserves. To hanging out with engineers, mortuary affairs guys, right? The guys whose job it is to prepare the bodies of the dead to be sent home, doctors, supply clerks. I mean, every different type of job in the military. I spent time with all those units and chatted with those people. So I got a pretty sort of broad range of peaks into different experiences in the military.
Yeah, it does sound really interesting because I think if you go out there as an engineer, you're just doing engineering work. If you go out there as a chef or as a supplier, you're just doing that job pretty much for the whole time. And infantry, you're going out doing different tasks, but they're around the same thing. And it sounds like, your role was really interesting to experience different parts of the military, I suppose, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You show up for the most interesting parts of other people's jobs and then you go away.
And so did you have to do much reporting for back home, to
that's what the combat correspondents were doing. And
cool.
I was assigning them, working like a news editor sort of for a very small outfit that was, basically, our primary audience was the families back home, telling them what their, sons and daughters were doing. Right. But also talking with local press, coordinating embeds, the New York Times, was coming through, wanted to be hooked up with units. A lot of them would come through. TQ,
I was going to ask if you had civilians embedded and
all
attached
the time,
to the patrols.
Constantly. Yeah.
Were they decent? Did they behave themselves?
Yeah, I mean, depends on the individual, but yeah, for the most part. I really liked, chatting with the reporters. Some of them had really good read on the situation, right?
That's cool.
Obviously, you had people who had ideological blinkers on, right? On sort of both kind of pro-war and anti-war sides, right? There's, there were guys who just everything that you were doing was amazing, and folks who were very skeptical, right, of everything that you were doing. But you also have just some really fantastic reporters who oftentimes would have a better read on the situation than a lot of folks in the military, right? And they were going places that sometimes that the military couldn't, and so you had some very interesting folks come through.
That's good. Now, before we move away from Iraq, is there a time, an experience during that 13 months that really stands out to you for what you experienced, what you did, or anything along those lines?
So two things. One I already told you about was that first truck bomb, right? Which was so. I mean, there are a couple things that stand out. There's one time when guys who had been tortured came in through our hospital. It was driving through Ramadi after the Anbar Awakening and seeing things open up, and driving through Fallujah. And I remember being on Route Fran, and there was a bridal shop, and the Marines that I were with, Route Fran was a dangerous place right? And they see this and they're like, is that a bridal shot on Fran? You know, like, and then that event with those guys doing the town hall stays in my mind. The other thing that stays in my mind was we had an incident where a Marine came in. He'd been shot by a insurgent sniper.
Okay.
He comes in and the docs obviously do everything they can to try and save him, and he dies, right? And it's crushing. You know, it's crushing when that happens for the docs. And in that moment, they hear that the insurgent is coming in. And he's also injured. So he comes in and they stabilize him and he lives. And then this nurse is tapped to be this guy's flight nurse. And so he just, you know, they take him on to the next level of care. And so he's just talking to me after this experience of just like, you know, having the Marine die, and then the guy who killed him is there, and then he's just there with him in the helicopter, checking his vitals and making sure he's okay as they go on to the next stage. And that image of him there, and of him telling me about it, stays in my mind.
Yeah, I think whatever you've gone through in Iraq will stick in your mind. So thank you for sharing those stories that you went through. So 13 months, you make your way back to the States, I guess. And are you given some leave, chill out time, or what does it look like?
Go back to New York, see friends and family, hang out with a poet buddy of mine who buys me like 4 martinis, and of course I haven't had alcohol in months. So
you did not chug, just to make sure, right?
I did not chug. I was flying high. Yeah. Yeah. And then I was in the military for another, I came back February 2008, and then I got out in July of 2009. So I was in for another year and a half, basically, after I got back from Iraq. Yeah.
And if in that last year and a half, what was the last kind of year and a half for you in the military doing?
So I became the division PAO at some point. I mean, worked with some great people. One thing that was strange was I was getting out, like I'd always only intended to do 4 years and then go on to do, whatever else I wanted to do with my life. Like military had never been my ambition, but it's a very strange thing to be just deciding like, okay, I'm done with the war when the war keeps going on. Like, it's very weird, right? And I'm just going to make my own kind of like private, like I'm done, I'm out, see you guys. And, I'm training Marines. We're going over. My chief, a great guy, Durham Gardner, he would end up going to Afghanistan, and he got blown up and lost an eye, and lost part of his vision. And so he's still in the Marine Corps. He's an awesome guy. He's got like an Eagle Globe and anchor, big eye. Yeah. I did meet one Marine, who really impressed me. So there was a unit that had gone over to Iraq, and there are these 2 Marines who are gate guard, right? Of course, if you're at a combat outpost in the middle of a town, gate guard is it's the most dangerous position, it's the most exposed position, and the most dangerous thing that you could deal with would be a suicide truck bomb coming your way, right? Because you either sort of fire on it and force it to early detonate, in which case it's a good chance that the explosion is going to kill you, or you duck and run for cover, in which case it'll sort of blow through your gate and kill all your friends, which is not a great set of options. These 2 Marines, Jordan Herder and Jonathan Yale, were at the gate with a couple of Iraqi police officers. Big truck starts coming, careening through the Serpentine. The police officers sort of run for cover. They all ultimately live. Yale and Herder fire on the truck, and it detonates, and they both die. And so they were going to be posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, both of them.
Okay.
And they're each from different units, because it was sort of, this unit had just come in, so they were doing the kind of left seat, right seat, share the ropes kind of thing. So Yale was from the old unit, Herder was from the new one. And one of Herder's buddies was a guy named Nick Zoss. And so when I did sort of interviews and sort of things, Nick was one of the guys that I introduced people to. And great guy, clearly deeply affected by his friend's death. Funny, genial, sort of open-hearted kind of guy, who really wanted to, impress upon people. Nick's character. Okay, sorry, Jordan's character. And around that time, I set up one interview with a captain from the other unit that Yale had been in, and he was about to head to Afghanistan, and did an interview where I set up him and Nick to be talking to the journalist at the same time.
Okay.
And through that, when Nick found out that the captain was going to Afghanistan, he asked him if he had slots for Nick to get on that deployment. And everybody at that time knew that Afghanistan was where the fighting was, right? Iraq was fairly quiet at that time. And I asked him, why he did that. And he said, having a friend of yours die in front of you tends to shred people's notions of, sort of what combat is and what it, might be. And he said, Afghanistan's where the fighting is. And the unit that's going over, they're going to have a tough deployment. They're going to lose people. And I know what it's like to lose a friend and have to go out the next day and the next day on patrol when all you want to do is grieve. Mm-hmm. And he said, I think I can help. Which struck me as really honorable.
Yeah.
And very brave.
Sounds it does.
And he died in a IED blast, a couple months in to his deployment. And IEDs, they don't give you opportunity for heroism, right? Mm-hmm. His death. It's not like Jordan Harder and Jonathan Yale, where you can say these guys stood up and made a brave decision and saved people's lives. It's not that clear cut a case. But when I think about courage, I don't just think of the kind of moments of crisis things like what Jordan Harder and Jonathan Yale did. I also, as impressive as it is, right, which is incredibly impressive. I think about 20-year-old kid. He was 21 when he died, making a quiet decision to go overseas and try and help, mm-hmm. knowing full well where he was going and what death in combat looked like, because he'd seen it firsthand.
And how dangerous it is, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Don't know what else to ask about that. I don't think you can. But any final words on them?
It's two really impressive kids.
Yeah.
And kids, they're kids. Yeah. Even when I was like, 24, 25 when I got in the military, something like that, 25, I think. And I'd look at these, redeployments, we'd have a unit coming back from Afghanistan and just be a bunch of skinny kids. They're so young.
Mm. Yeah, I think people forget how young a lot of the people that were injured or even killed, how young they were. So it's good to remember them. forever. So just going to come back to yourself, Phil. So you mentioned about the year and a half, you knew your time was going to come up in the Marines. Did you know what your transition was going to be back to civilian life, and what you were going to look to do when you became a civilian once more?
Yeah, I applied for a MFA program, so to study creative writing at Hunter College.
What's that, sorry?
Mm-hmm.
Did you say MFA?
MFA, yeah, to study creative writing. So I knew I was going to go to Hunter College. I had the GI Bill, right? So it was paid for, which is amazing. So I figured I'd do 2 years of writing degree, and then I'd still have GI Bill to get to go to teacher's college. So I could become an English teacher, right? That was my plan, to do the kind of writing thing first and then use the remainder of the GI Bill to, become a high school English teacher. That's sort of the idea.
And just before you carry on, the GI Bill, is that a chunk of money that you can put towards education? Is that right?
Yeah, it's a chunk of money that you can put towards education, and they give you living expenses pegged to the zip code that you live in. So because I was going to school in New York, that was, you sort of got a pretty good deal, right? And yeah, so that was the plan. So I got out. I took a trip to Vietnam and Cambodia with some buddies. One buddy from high school, one buddy from the Corps, and then went into a graduate creative writing program, which was a different culture from the Marine Corps.
I bet.
It was wonderful. I studied with amazing people: Colin McCann, Peter Carey, Nathan Englander, Claire Massoud, Patrick McGrath. I mean, just incredible writers. Yeah.
And so how long was that for? And did you become a teacher in the end?
Yeah, so that was 2 years.
Right.
I then started on my teacher's college, and I actually sort of student taught in a middle school, though the teacher that I was paired with had to stop teaching. She was very old. And so I ultimately had my own class that I could sort of do whatever I wanted with, which was fun. I had 5th through 8th graders. And I gave them a lot of really dark journalism that they enjoyed. But during that first semester, I sold my first book, Redeployment. And on the basis of 5 stories, about a quarter of the book was written at that point. So I had to drop out to finish the book. And then that book did very well. And I started writing full time.
Okay. So Redeployment, you mentioned your first book. I actually do have a copy right here. So I'm just going to hold this up for the YouTube aspect. So there it is. A cool military person stood next to a Bergen. Do you guys call them Bergens or rucks or something like that, don't you?
Sea bag.
Oh, what bag?
Sea bag.
Sea bag. Okay. With all the kit in it. And it's got a National Book Award winner. So you won awards for this book as well.
Yes, yeah, it was incredible. Had an incredible response to the book beyond anything I imagined.
And so just as a kind of like brief overview of what is in this book, could you mention about it? Sure.
So each story is from a different perspective, right? So the first story is told by an infantryman who had been in the Second Battle of Fallujah, right? And the first sentence of the book is, the first paragraph of the book is, "We shot dogs, not by accident. We did it on purpose, and we called it Operation Scooby. I'm a dog person, so I thought about that a lot."
Okay.
And it talks about him coming home. It's a story of him coming home, and then so there's a story from a guy like that. There's a story told by an adjutant, right? There's a story told by a mortuary affairs specialist, right? There's a story told by a chaplain, that kind of thing. So it's 12 stories, each from a different perspective, a radically different perspective. Guys doing different jobs. And the idea was to kind of give people not just, this is the Iraq war, but hear all these very disparate Iraq war experiences from guys who, if you put them all in a room together, they wouldn't have the same politics, they wouldn't have the same experiences, they wouldn't have the same sense of the war. But they would have, I think, maybe a series of kind of questions about the war, right? That they're all kind of circling around. Right?
Yeah.
Because I came back from Iraq, you know, with a decent amount of questions about what that was and what that meant and what America looked like when you get back home, right? You know, what is this country that sent me overseas, right? What does it look like now that I've been overseas, and what does it feel like?
So all these separate stories, you know, they've got characters in and stuff. Are they based on true events at some stages?
Sometimes,
or
yeah.
all of
I
them?
did a lot of
Yeah,
research
some of
for
them?
the book. I mean, like that. So that first story, right? I knew two guys from the Second Battle of Fallujah who talked about shooting dogs because they'd seen dogs eating human corpses, and so they would shoot them, right? And Operation Scooby is what one of them called it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there are definitely real life experiences that went into the book, things that I saw, things that people told me, and then, you know, but it's fiction, right? So even when you're taking true events, it's changed in some way, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so this was your first book.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned you writ half of it when you were going through your teacher training, or when you're actually a teacher. What made you start writing this book? What drove you to start putting words to pages?
I started writing when I came back from Iraq, right? And it was that sense of like, okay, what was that? You know, what was that, right? What is this place? And the only way that I know how to do that is to write a story, right? Because I think that there's like the lessons that you draw from an experience, but then there's, you know, the experience itself, what it felt like, what it smelled like, you know, what kind of thoughts you had as it was going, what kind of confusions it caused in you. And we make of those what we will, but I think those experiences reign primary, and I wanted to let people in to a sort of sense of engagement with kind of grappling with those experiences, and you know, each story is in a first person perspective. I wanted people to imagine themselves inside those skulls.
That's good. Yeah.
And you know, some of the nicest feedback that I've ever received on my work is it's happened a couple times where a couple has come to me, and one person has served and one hasn't, and they told me that, you know, they didn't really talk much about, you know, the military veteran spouse's experience, but then they read, you know, he read my book, and then they, you know, they both read it and then would talk about it. And as they talked about the book, he'd bring in his own experiences, and to me, that's kind of it's the best compliment, right? That's what literature can do. It kind of opens up a kind of bridge space that people can both inhabit, right? Across very different types of experience, right? That sometimes I think it's very easy for us to feel sort of isolated in our experiences sometimes if they're very different from other people. But it's not just that people need to be able to share what's important with them, with those around them. You know, I have a buddy who, you know, he's a highly decorated Marine, was at the Second Battle of Fallujah. He's a writer now, Elliot Ackerman, a brilliant writer. You know, Silver Star, Bronze Star, multiple deployments. And, you know, there's this sort of idea of like, no one can ever know what you've been through, right? If you've been to war. And he doesn't like it because he says, you know, he's like, people who tell me that are telling me that my children can never know what I've been through, that my wife can never know what I've been through, which to me feels like they're telling me that I can never really come home.
Okay.
And what's sort of amazing about literature, and not just about war literature, but, you know, think of all the different places that we go, how much can actually be expressed, right? Of experiences that are far outside of what you encounter in your own life. And so that's for me what good art can do. It can open up those corners of experience that you can suddenly start sharing with other people. And what happens when you share things with other people is you learn about what you've been through, right?
Yeah.
Because just because you've been through something doesn't mean that you understand it. or you have a good perspective on it, or anything close to a complete perspective on it. And I feel like as human beings, we share things through talking with each other, and and sometimes people don't get it or aren't interested, but real conversation between people who are honestly trying to understand each other, I think can do absolutely unbelievable things. It is utterly essential for being a human being, right? And art at its best is that process, right? Is a part of that process of opening us to each other.
Yeah, good words. And I think the point of different perspective, they could have been on the same deployment but have different views, seen different things, and that's a real good reason of hopefully what I'm trying to do with this podcast is we could have two veterans sharing about the same mission, but we'll get completely different kind of mindset about it. So yeah, hopefully all these piece together and people get a better perspective of the military and different areas of the military. So this book here, as far as I'm aware, is not your one and only book.
No.
Can you mention about some of the others that you've written?
Sure. This is Missionaries.
That's good.
So this is a novel, and it takes place mostly in Colombia, but also in Iraq and Afghanistan and Yemen and the United States. And it follows four narrators who start out in different wars, and is really about how America wages war around the world. War now involves special forces, mercenaries, technology, proxy forces, and it's trying to look at that sort of system of warfare and the connections between them, because you'll have people who are sort of bouncing from conflict to conflict, and tactics that sort of originate in Iraq and then get used in Colombia. And so, there's two Colombian characters, narrators, two American narrators. One's a journalist, one is an American special forces medic, and then the Colombian characters, one is a kid who ends up in paramilitary group in a sort of small border town on the border with Venezuela, and the other is a officer in the Colombian military. And it's sort of about how all their different paths intertwine.
And how is that book going for you? Is it doing as well as Redeployment?
It's doing great, and the response to it has been really incredible. Nice. And also it's been interesting, a former Southern Command, commanding general, said very, very kind things about it, and described it as lethally accurate in terms of how it described the war in Colombia. Right. To my mind, Colombia's greatest living novelist reviewed the book into much similarities about the accuracy of the representation when it was doing. A former SOCOM commander, so Special Operations Commander, also gave me some great feedback on the book. Barrack Obama also liked it. So it was interesting to see people who are intimately engaged in making the kind of decisions that I'm writing about, engaging with the book.
That's good.
Was interesting to see.
And it's nice that Barack Obama put that on as one of his favorite books of the year, right?
Yes. Yeah. No, he's been kind to both my books. I feel bad because in nonfiction I tend to criticize him, but that's sort of the citizen's duty, right?
Sure. So these books, where can people get them? I saw them on Amazon.
Anywhere, yeah. And I have a collection of my nonfiction is coming out in May. I'm not sure when it's coming out in Britain, but it's called Uncertain Ground. So citizenship in an age of endless, invisible war. So I've been writing, nonfiction for the past, decade, trying to think through. It's a strange time, right, where we have a military presence all around the world. We're killing people in a lot of countries, right? But it doesn't really feel like war to us, and it's heavily reliant on special operations forces, on drones, on proxy forces, on mercenaries. So the to the average citizen, it remains mostly invisible, but it's highly consequential around the world, and sort of thinking through what that means in terms of, what this sort of new stage of warfare means militarily, what it means in terms of, citizenship, what the moral stakes of are. That's sort of the concern running through those pieces.
Okay. Very interesting that you mentioned that's going to come out in May, because this episode we're recording now is actually going to be going live in May. So
Perfect.
that's pretty good timing. So yeah, hopefully it's available around the world, or especially in the UK, not long after that. So alongside the books, what else have you been doing? Is there any other work you've been carrying out?
Right. So I've done this podcast for PBS. So PBS has a documentary called American Veteran, where they, over the course of years, this documentary crew interviewed, veterans from World War II to the present day, asking them their life stories. And then they were trying to sort of get a documentary series that aired a couple months ago on PBS that would kind of capture the incredible variety and diversity of veteran experience while still sort of being coherent. And they sort of anchored it around kind of key experiences, sort of similar to your 4 questions, right? So like joining the military, what training was like, going overseas for the first time, coming home. And it's a great series. But after they did it, they sort of realized, they had spent years tracking down some of the most interesting veterans they could find. And they had all this tape of like just really incredible life stories. And in the documentary, it's all kind of, spliced with lots of different stories. It's a different type of storytelling, but they thought it would be great to have a podcast where they took the audio and had one veteran tell their story in total. And so they brought me on to host it, to provide, kind of little interstitial bits of context and commentary where necessary. But for the most part, each episode is one veteran telling their story from the beginning of, how they entered the military and where they were from, to, going to war, their experiences there, coming home. And some of the stories are just amazing. I mean, they're all amazing, and they're people you might have heard of. The first episode is the first Black female POW, Shoshana Johnson. And, it's her story of being captured. It's extremely viscerally intense, that story. She's also very funny as a storyteller. But one of the amazing things is her talking about coming home, about reconnecting with members of her family over their shared service, and bringing things in terms of her transition in process of dealing with what she'd been through in relationship to her family members, talking about the difficulties of dating when you're, a veteran with a Bronze Star and an insecure dudes can't handle it. To Frank DeVita, who's men abode in the initial invasion at Omaha Beach on D-Day. His story is just unbelievably harrowing. I mean, and they're trying to capture a whole range of experiences. One guy who became a conscientious objector after seeing American troops accidentally kill a child in Iraq. On the other hand, you have, like a World War II veteran who loved the military, discovered gay life in the military, he volunteered for missions on bomber crews, which was like the most dangerous thing you could possibly be doing, because he just found it so exciting. There's a story from a Tuskegee airman, his first time sort of integrated in the military was in a POW camp, right, during World War II. I mean, just the Vietnam era and just really interesting life stories. So
lots of different stories and experiences.
Incredible. Yeah, so it was really fun to work on, right?
That's big. Yeah, it's interesting that a big network like PBS put all that money into what is great, because that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to do the same thing, but I'm just a much smaller crew because it's just me. But it's just really interesting that that's happened. And what's that called, if anybody does want to jump on it and have a listen and find it?
American Veteran Unforgettable Stories.
Okay, and that's available on the podcast.
Yeah, any podcast app, you'll be able to find it.
Excellent. And is there anything else that you wanted to share on your episode? Because this is your episode.
No, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All I want to say, Phil, is thank you so much for sharing what you've gone through, your training and your time out in Iraq. It's been really cool to hear your experiences. And what's the acronym for your whilst you're in PAO? Is that right?
PAO, yeah.
PAO, and that was Public Affairs Officer.
Yep.
Hey, look at me, I educated. So that was really cool. And also, thank you for your time. We don't have infinite amount of it. You gave me some of it today, so thank you very much for coming on the show and giving us some of your time.
A pleasure.
And lastly, I say this to all my guests: thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service.
No problem, no problem. And yeah, it's going to be great. I'll try and catch up with you again. And look at your podcast that you've been doing with PBS. Pretty cool. So yeah, thanks once more.
Thank you.
This has been Military Veterans Podcast. Out.